He'd reset the terminal 3 times. It still looped. The diagnostic screen, a placid blue field of text, offered no errors, only a recurring, silent refresh every 17 seconds. Elias Thorne rested his forehead against the cool glass of the server room window, the low, steady hum of the mainframes vibrating through his skull. This was his new kingdom. Substation 7, a data archiving facility so far removed from the central network it might as well have been on the moon. His transfer here, framed as a strategic reassignment for a senior analyst, was a quiet exile. His brother, Mark, had called it a professional burial. His sister, Clara, had been more direct. They're putting you in a concrete hut in the middle of nowhere, Elias. After everything you gave them, why are you just accepting it? He didn't have an answer for them, because the truth was a hollow space in his chest he refused to acknowledge. He wanted the silence. He wanted the routine, the predictable hum, the sterile order of data that, unlike life, could be sorted, archived, and contained. There was one extra login attempt. Timestamp 2:47. The detail was lodged in the pre-boot sequence log, a ghost in the machine that only a full diagnostic sweep would catch. It wasn't a failed attempt. It was a ghost connection, a query that touched the system and vanished before authentication, leaving behind nothing but a digital smudge. Unauthorized. His predecessor, a man named Harris who had retired with suspicious haste, was known for his sloppiness. But this felt different. It wasn't sloppy. It was precise, almost invisible. Elias leaned back in his worn chair, the vinyl sighing under his weight. The taste of dust, or something like it, was in his mouth. He ran a hand over his face, the rasp of his stubble a familiar, grounding friction. For 5 years, since Leo's death, control had been his only currency. He controlled his diet, his schedule, his emotions. He managed grief by converting it into a series of manageable tasks. Now, here, in this meticulously controlled environment, was a variable he couldn't account for. He pulled up the master access log for the last 6 months. He scrolled through the entries, the green text stark against the black screen. Thousands of routine pings from Central Command, automated system checks, Harris's own logins. And then he saw it again. Another 247 query, 3 weeks prior. And another a month before that. Pattern. A quiet, insistent knocking at a door no one was supposed to know existed. He opened a new text file, the cursor blinking expectantly. He typed the first timestamp, a small action, a question without a voice. The hum of the servers seemed to deepen, no longer a comfort but a repository of secrets. Waiting. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The substation was a monument to obsolescence. Its primary function was to house legacy data, projects decommissioned, departments absorbed, initiatives that had failed quietly and been buried in digital concrete. Elias's job was to ensure the data remained intact but dormant, a librarian for a dead language. He spent his days running integrity checks on magnetic tapes and optical platters, the physical weight of the information a strange comfort. It was in one of these deep archive dives, chasing the ghost query, that he found the first thread. A single, corrupted directory buried within the records of the Inland Infrastructure Development Fund, a bloated public-private partnership shuttered a decade ago. The directory was named simply Ngale. Most of the files were unreadable, digital rot having consumed them. But one file remained, a budget reconciliation memo from 15 years ago. It was a dry document, filled with line items and cost codes. Elias's eyes scanned the columns of figures, his mind accustomed to finding patterns in numerical noise. He was about to close it, to mark the entire directory as a loss, when a figure caught his eye. A transfer authorization. A single payment of $134,867,550. The number was an absurdity. It was a rounding error the size of a small nation's GDP, funneled from the General Infrastructure Fund into a single opaque project code, P778. Nightingale. He searched the entire substation archive for P778. Nothing. He ran a search on the live network using his limited credentials. Access denied. The code didn't exist. It was a financial black hole, a ghost that had swallowed an immense sum and left behind only this single faded receipt. He sat back, the pressure behind his eyes building. He thought of Leo of the official report. A structural failure. A bridge collapse during a routine army engineering exercise. Unforeseeable, they had said.
À tragique, unavoidable accident.
The report had been neat, precise, and utterly devoid of meaning. It had explained what happened, but never why. Why had a bridge certified just 6 months prior failed so catastrophically? Why were the material stress tests from the construction phase classified? He had accepted it, because not accepting it would have broken the fragile shell of control he'd built around his grief. He had folded the report, filed it away, and focused on the quiet routine of his own life's decommissioning. Now this number, this name, Nightingale, felt connected. A wild, irrational leap his analytical mind tried to dismiss. He was a grieving father seeing patterns in the static. That's what a psychiatrist would say. That's what Clara would say, her voice thick with gentle concern. He stood up and walked to the small, grimy window that looked out over the flat, empty landscape. The sky was a sheet of muted gray. He was alone out here, with the buzzing hum of the machines and the ghosts of dead data. Was he chasing one of them? Or was one of them chasing him? He returned to the terminal, his hands steady. He printed the memo, the flimsy paper warm from the laser printer. He folded it carefully, twice, and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest. It felt heavy, a physical weight. He retraced his steps in the system, erasing the logs of his search, covering his digital tracks with the practiced ease of a man who knew that some questions, once asked, could not be unasked. He had spent 5 years avoiding the why. Now, it seemed the why had found him. ####. Following the thread was like tracing a chalk outline after a rainstorm. The shape was there, but the substance was gone. Elias spent his nights in the sterile quiet of the substation, long after his official shift ended. He used backdoors he'd built into the network during his years at Central, old sysadmin privileges he was sure the department had forgotten to revoke. He searched for personnel associated with the Inland Infrastructure Development Fund. Most were retired or deceased. He cross-referenced the names with the dates on the Nightingale memo. He was looking for an overlap, a signature, anyone who might have authorized the transfer. He found a name, Anya Sharma. At the time, she was a junior compliance officer. Now, she was Deputy Director of Records Management at Central Command. She was the gatekeeper. He composed the email carefully. He kept it procedural, bland. He referenced the corrupted Gale directory, framing his query as a simple matter of data restoration. A significant financial record appears to be missing its corresponding project documentation, he wrote, requesting access to project file P778 for archival completion. He knew the request would be flagged. A query from a defunct substation about a non-existent project file was an anomaly. It was a quiet knock on a locked door. He was testing the system, seeing if it was listening. The reply came in less than an hour. It was from Sharma herself. The brevity was a statement in itself. File P778 is not available in the Central Archive. The record is sealed under Administrative Directive 11B. No further action is required. Your efforts in maintaining archival integrity are noted. Sealed. Not non-existent. Sealed. The distinction was everything. It was confirmation that the file and the project were real. And noted was not a commendation. It was a warning. The next day, the back doors he'd been using were closed. His old privileges were finally, quietly, revoked. A system-wide security update, the automated email stated. Coincidence. He didn't believe in coincidences. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the substation's overzealous air conditioning. The system wasn't just a passive entity. It was listening, and it was responding. He sat in the buzzing silence, the blankness of the access-denied message on his screen more menacing than any threat. He had a name, Sharma, and a Directive 11B. It wasn't much, but he also had the printout of the memo, a physical fact in a world of digital denials. He drove home under a sky the color of slate. In his small, sterile apartment, he unlocked the drawer where he kept Leo's things. A service medal, a photograph of him grinning from the top of a climbing wall, and the folded official report on his death. He placed the Nightingale memo beside the report. The two documents lay side by side, one a public statement of tragic loss, the other a secret ledger of immense, unexplained wealth. He couldn't prove the connection, but he could feel it, an off-kilter resonance between them, a shared, unspoken gravity. The hunt was no longer about a data anomaly. It was about his son. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The pushback was subtle, almost polite. It began with an unscheduled maintenance audit at the substation. Two technicians from Central arrived, their faces unreadable, their movements efficient and detached. They spent 2 days running diagnostics he had already run, checking connections he knew were secure. They spoke little, offering only clipped, professional courtesies. Elias understood their true purpose. They were taking inventory, mapping his workspace, checking his logs for any unauthorized activity. They were sweeping for him. He offered them coffee, which they politely declined. He watched them from his office, the glass wall making him feel like a specimen under observation. When they left, the substation felt different, colder. A single, high-capacity data cable that connected to a redundant satellite uplink had been disconnected. The tag on the wire read, "Decommissioned network redundancy." It was the only link fast enough to pull the kind of data he'd been searching for. They had clipped his wings. A week later, David Chan, a junior archivist at Central whom Elias had cautiously contacted for information on Directive 11B, stopped replying to his messages. A search of the internal directory showed his status had been changed. On extended personal leave, the phrase was a corporate euphemism for a disappearance. Elias felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had put someone else at risk. The quiet, solitary nature of his investigation was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. The system wasn't just walls and firewalls, it was people, and it protected itself by isolating, silencing, and removing those who asked the wrong questions. The world began to feel thin, the fabric of his reality worn and frayed. The silence of the substation, once a comfort, now felt like a form of pressure, the hum of the servers a constant, low-grade threat. One evening, driving home, he noticed a nondescript sedan behind him. It stayed 2 car lengths back, its headlights muted. When he took an unnecessary turn down a residential street, it followed. When he pulled into a gas station and waited, it drove past slowly, the driver a featureless silhouette against the dusk. He didn't see it again, but the message was clear. You are being watched. We know what you are doing. Stop. The isolation was complete. His family called, their voices full of a concern he couldn't satisfy. You sound tired, Eli, Clara said. Are you okay out there? He assured her he was fine, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. He was anything but fine. He was operating on the frayed edge of obsession, fueled by stale coffee and a grief he had finally allowed to become rage. He was alone, cut off, and being warned off by a faceless power. And for the first time since Leo died, he felt a terrifying, clarifying purpose. They weren't just protecting a secret, they were protecting a crime. And he could not let it go. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The doubt came at 3 a.m., in the sterile glow of his kitchen. Was he losing his mind? He stood over the sink, staring at his reflection in the dark window, a pale, hollowed-out version of the man he used to be. The face of a ghost, haunted by other ghosts. Maybe the connection between Nightingale and Leo was a fiction, a grand, conspiratorial narrative his grieving mind had constructed to give a meaningless death some semblance of meaning. The thought was a cold wave, threatening to pull him under. He saw the pattern. A reclusive, emotionally damaged man, transferred to an isolated post, begins seeing conspiracies in random data. It was the perfect profile of a breakdown. The system hadn't broken him, he had arrived broken. He remembered Leo's last visit, the argument they'd had. It was about nothing, about everything. About Leo's choice to enlist, about Elias's suffocating worry. You have to let me live my own life, "Dad?" Leo had said, his voice tight with a frustration Elias hadn't understood. "You can't control everything." 2 months later, he was gone. The guilt was a physical thing, a constant pressure in his chest. Was this investigation his penance? A desperate, posthumous attempt to finally be the protective father he felt he'd failed to be? The thought fractured his resolve. He felt the immense gravitational pull of just letting it go. He could delete the file, burn the memo, and sink back into the quiet hum of the substation, letting the silence reclaim him. He could go back to the managed, orderly grief he understood. He opened the drawer and looked at the photo of his son. Leo, age 12, on a hiking trip in the Sierras. He was pointing at something off-camera, his face alight with discovery. He had always been the one to look closer, to follow the unmarked trail. He wouldn't have accepted unforeseeable, he would have pulled at the thread. Elias closed his eyes. The image of his son's face burned onto the back of his eyelids. The doubt didn't vanish, but it shifted. It no longer mattered if he was right about the connection. It didn't matter if he was paranoid or broken. What mattered was the question itself. A $134 million secret. A sealed file. A dead son. To stop now would be the ultimate betrayal, not just of Leo, but of the man Leo had believed his father to be. He took a deep breath, the air thin and cold. The internal fracture wasn't healing, but he had chosen which side of the chasm to stand on. He would see it through. He owed his son the truth, even if it was a truth he had to invent. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The summons came as a calendar invitation with no subject, from an unlisted sender. The location was a coffee shop in a sterile corporate park halfway between the substation and Central Command. He knew who it would be. Anya Sharma sat at a small table in the corner, a ceramic mug of tea untouched before her. She looked smaller in person, her severe professional demeanor replaced by a controlled, palpable tension. Her dark suit was immaculate, a piece of armor. She didn't offer a greeting. "You're persistent," she began, her voice low and even. "I'll give you that. You should have stopped when your access was revoked." Elias sat down. He didn't say anything, just watched her. The silence in the near-empty cafe was broken only by the hiss of an espresso machine and the distant hum of traffic. He was the listener now. Directive 11B is a designation for projects deemed critical to national commercial interests, she said, her eyes fixed on the tabletop. "It's a black box. Money goes in, results are expected, but the process is not documented in standard channels. It's a way to bypass regulatory oversight for the sake of speed and innovation." She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Or that's the theory." "Nightingale," Elias said, the name a flat statement. Anya flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. Project Nightingale was a materials science initiative. The goal was to develop a new, lightweight, high-tensile composite for use in major infrastructure projects. Bridges, dams, transit systems. It promised to cut construction costs by 30%. Elias felt the cold dread coalesce in his gut. It didn't work. She finally looked at him, her eyes dark and unreadable. The early stress tests were inconsistent. There were microfractures under certain vibration frequencies. The lead researchers said it needed another 5 years of development. The backers, a consortium of private contractors with deep ties to the department, didn't want to wait. They had contracts lined up. They pushed it through. Her voice was stripped of all emotion, a recitation of facts. "I was a junior officer. My job was to sign off on the compliance summary, the one that omitted the inconclusive stress tests. I was told it was a matter of provisional approval. I was told the issues would be resolved in the final production phase." "You knew," Elias said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was a shared truth." "I knew the report was incomplete," she corrected, the distinction vital to her. "I didn't know they would deploy it untested. I didn't know people would. I didn't know." The mask of control frayed for just a moment, revealing a flicker of profound, suffocating guilt. She pushed a small, folded piece of paper across the table. It was thick, like a piece of cardstock. That's the access code to a fire safe in the subbasement of the old federal courthouse. It's scheduled for decommissioning. All the physical Nightingale files are there. The real ones. The stress tests. The internal memos. Everything. She stood up, her movement stiff. I've seen your son's file, Mr. Thorne. The bridge he was on. It was one of the first to use the Nightingale composite. You have 72 hours before the safe is removed and its contents incinerated. She walked away without another word, leaving him with the folded paper and the weight of a truth more terrible than he had imagined. It wasn't just about money. The $134 million wasn't the secret. It was the price of the weapon. The secret was what it had been used for. He sat there for a long time, the quiet hum of the cafe a distant echo of the servers at his substation. The confession was over. It offered no redemption, only a key and a deadline. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The decision felt less like a choice and more like the end of a long, narrow corridor. There was only one door. For 2 days, Elias lived in a state of heightened, cold clarity. He went to work at the substation, performing his duties with a mechanical precision that felt alien to him. The hum of the servers, the flick of the switches, the silent hallways. They were all part of a world he was already leaving behind. He was a ghost now, moving through the motions of a life that was no longer his. He spent the nights planning, not like a spy in a film, but like the systems analyst he was. He researched secure, encrypted drop services. He studied the schematics of the old courthouse, noting ventilation shafts, maintenance access points, and security patrol schedules. He knew he couldn't go to the department. The system that created Nightingale would never allow itself to be held accountable. He couldn't go to the police. This was a matter of sealed federal directives, beyond their jurisdiction. To them, he would be a trespasser, a thief. The truth had to be cauterized, exposed to the air by an outside party. He found a journalist, a woman named Sarah Jenkins who had a reputation for meticulous, long-form investigative work, specializing in military-industrial malfeasance. She didn't chase headlines. She built cases. She was the one. On the third night, he drove to the city. The courthouse was a behemoth of stone and silence, a sleeping giant. He didn't force a lock or break a window. He used a maintenance key he'd acquired years ago, a relic from a citywide network upgrade he had supervised, a key he was supposed to have returned. It still worked. The building was cold, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. He navigated the subbasement by the thin beam of a flashlight, the silence absolute. He found the fire safe, a block of gray, impassive steel. The code Anya had given him worked. The heavy door swung open with a soft groan. Inside were a dozen document boxes, each labeled Gale P. 778. He didn't read them. He couldn't. He just started taking photographs with a small digital camera, page after page. The damning stress tests, the internal memos urging caution, the sign-off sheets with forged signatures, the list of infrastructure projects, bridges, overpasses, municipal buildings, where the composite had been used. A list of quiet, ticking time bombs scattered across the country. And at the bottom of the last box, a single manila envelope. Inside was a list of names, a settlement ledger, payments made to families of victims in a dozen small, unrelated accidents, all linked to structural failures, all for silence. Leo's name was not on it. His death was still officially an accident. He worked for hours, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer, cold weight of the crime. When he was done, he closed the safe, locked it, and walked out, leaving no trace of his presence. Back in his sterile apartment, he didn't sleep. He loaded the images onto an encrypted drive, composed a short, anonymous email to Sarah Jenkins with a subject line, Nightingale, and a single sentence. The proof is in the material. He attached the drive, hit send, and then physically disconnected his modem. He sat in the dark, the flickering LED on the router the only light. The act was done. There were no guarantees. The email might be ignored. The data might be dismissed. The system might swallow this act of defiance just as it had swallowed everything else. But he had acted. He had taken the ghost in the machine and given it a voice. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The world did not change. The sun rose. Traffic hummed on the highway. At the substation, the servers continued their low, steady drone. For a week, an unbearable silence followed his decision. Elias went through his days in a fog of anticipation and dread. Every news alert on his phone made his heart leap. Every official-looking car he passed seemed to be watching him. He expected a quiet visit, a knock on the door, his own extended personal leave, but nothing happened. The system's response was a profound, unnerving silence. It was as if he had thrown a stone into a bottomless well and was waiting for a splash that would never come. He thought of Anya Sharma, wondering if she felt it too, this tension of waiting. Had she covered her tracks? Or was she simply waiting for the inevitable consequences of her confession? He thought of the journalist Sarah Jenkins. Was she wading through the files, connecting the dots? Or had she dismissed it as the work of a crank? The ambiguity was a form of torture. The world continued on as if nothing had happened, and the weight of his knowledge, of his actions, grew heavier each day. Then one Tuesday it appeared. Not on the front page. Not on the evening news. It was a small article, buried deep in the financial section of a national paper, under Sarah Jenkins's byline. The headline was innocuous. Internal audit launched at infrastructure fund over past material contracts. It didn't mention Nightingale. It didn't mention a conspiracy or any deaths. It spoke of potential accounting irregularities and a review of legacy supply chain certifications. It was written in the dry, sterile language of the system itself. But to Elias, the words were explosive. It mentioned that several major construction firms had seen their stock dip. It noted that a powerful, semi-retired lobbyist had issued a terse no comment. It was not an exposé. It was a warning shot, a tiny crack in the dam, the first tremor. He read the article 3 times, his hands steady. It was enough. The truth was no longer his burden alone. It was out, a seed planted in the public record, waiting for the right conditions to grow. The system wouldn't collapse overnight, but something had shifted. An invisible lever had been pulled, and somewhere in the vast, cold machinery of power, a gear had slipped. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The next morning, Elias drove to Substation 7 for the last time. He walked through the silent hallways, the hum of the mainframes no longer a source of dread or comfort, but simply a sound. He sat at his desk, the place that had been both his prison and his sanctuary, and typed his resignation. He kept it brief, citing only personal reasons. He left the letter on the keyboard, next to his security badge and the key to the main door. He did not wipe his terminal or shred any files. He left it all as it was, an open book. Let them comb through it. There was nothing left for them to find. He walked out into the flat, gray light of midday. He didn't look back. He got into his car and started driving, with no destination in mind. He was leaving it all behind, the substation, the department, the ghost of the man who had sought refuge in routine. He was alone, but the quality of the solitude had changed. It was no longer the hollow loneliness of grief, but the clean, stark aloneness of awareness. He had confronted the faceless system not with a shout, but with a whisper. He had not won. He had not lost. He had simply acted. He drove past the turnoff for his apartment, staying on the main highway, heading west. The key to his old life no longer fit the lock of the man he had become. The road ahead was an unknown, a blank page. He didn't lock the car doors as he drove. He felt no need. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. Weeks later, he was in a small coastal town, a place of salt-laced air and the cry of gulls. He worked a simple job, repairing boat engines, his hands stained with grease instead of toner ink. He lived in a small room above the workshop, the window looking out over the gray, churning water of the Pacific. He rarely read the news. He didn't need to. One afternoon, while sanding the hull of a fishing trawler, he paused. A small bird had landed on the railing nearby. It was a common brown finch, unremarkable. It watched him with a bright, dark eye before taking flight, a small, resilient speck against the vast, indifferent sky. Elias watched it go, his expression unreadable. He felt the phantom pressure behind his eyes, a sensation that had been his constant companion for 5 years, begin to recede. It was not gone, but it was distant. He picked up his sandpaper and returned to his work, the rhythmic, scraping sound a quiet testament to the slow, painstaking process of making something whole again.